The airplane cruised high above the clouds, cutting through the thin air with a soft hum. Inside, the passengers were a mix of excitement and exhaustion, each lost in their own world as the flight continued. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm orange glow across the cabin. Among the travelers was a young woman, Anna, who had never been more excited for a trip in her life. She gazed out the window, her mind racing with thoughts of the adventure awaiting her. But little did she know, this flight would become a nightmare in the blink of an eye. The plane hit a sudden patch of turbulence, shaking the cabin violently. The lights flickered as the aircraft jolted, causing a few startled gasps from the passengers. Anna gripped the armrests of her seat, trying to steady herself. Her heart began to race, her mind scrambling to make sense of the shaking. The flight attendants quickly rushed to their seats, strapping in as the plane continued to rock. In the midst of the chaos, Anna noticed something strange. A woman a few rows ahead had started to panic. She was standing, clutching the side of her seat, her face contorted in fear. Anna tried to focus on the woman, but the turbulence made it difficult to see clearly. And then, as if in slow motion, the unimaginable happened. The woman, who was now at the edge of the aisle, lost her balance. She stumbled, falling backward toward the open cabin door. A scream escaped her lips as the gap between her and the ground below grew larger. The atmosphere on the plane shifted instantly from confusion to pure terror. The screams echoed in the cabin as Anna's heart nearly stopped. The woman was falling, and there was nothing anyone could do. Passengers around her were in complete panic, grabbing for anything they could hold on to as the plane continued to shake violently. The flight attendants were still strapped in, helpless as the situation unfolded. But then, something even more unbelievable happened. From the front of the plane, a calm figure stood up. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor who had been sitting quietly in first class, was now moving with surprising speed and confidence. His eyes were sharp, focused on the woman, and his presence alone seemed to command the entire cabin's attention. Without a second thought, Clint took action. He was in the aisle in an instant, his hand reaching out toward the woman, his grip firm and unyielding. The woman, still screaming, was mere inches from falling out of the plane, but Clint's calm, controlled movements were in stark contrast to the chaos around him. With one swift motion, Clint grabbed hold of the woman's wrist, pulling her back into the cabin. It was an incredible feat, considering the turbulence and the sheer force of the fall. The passengers around them watched in stunned silence, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Clint, never one to seek attention, didn't acknowledge the gasps and whispers around him. Instead, he gently helped the woman to her feet, his face a picture of calm, as if saving her from falling out of the plane was just another day for him. Anna, still in shock, couldn't believe her eyes. The man she had grown up watching on the big screen was now a hero in real life, and somehow, against all odds, he had saved the woman. The cabin was filled with a stunned silence. Time seemed to slow as Clint Eastwood, the man who had just saved a life, calmly returned to his seat as if nothing extraordinary had happened. His movements were deliberate, his expression unreadable, but there was no mistaking the gravity of the moment. The woman who had nearly fallen from the plane was now trembling in the aisle, looking at Clint with wide eyes, unable to form words. Anna couldn't look away. She had watched it all unfold before. Her eyes. How Clint had leaped into action. How his grip had been strong enough to prevent the woman from plummeting to certain death. It was like something out of one of his movies, but this was real life. The plane, still trembling from the earlier turbulence, began to steady. The flight attendants, who had been frozen in fear moments ago, slowly unstrapped themselves and began to check on the passengers. The woman was escorted back to her seat by one of the attendants, still shaking uncontrollably. But it wasn't just the woman who was affected. The passengers, too, were visibly shaken. Whispers filled the air, everyone processing what had just happened in their own way. Some were still holding on to the edges of their seats, while others were looking around in disbelief. Anna couldn't stop thinking about Clint. She had read about him in the news, seen his movies, but nothing had prepared her for the quiet strength he exhibited in that moment. It was as if, for a brief moment, he wasn't just an actor. He was a real-life hero. The plane was slowly returning to some semblance of normalcy, but for Anna, the events would stay with her forever. She would never forget the day she saw Clint Eastwood do the impossible. As the plane steadied and the turbulence subsided, Anna found herself unable to shake the image of Clint Eastwood. She had always admired his roles on screen, the strong, silent type who never hesitated to take control in the face of danger. But what she had witnessed just now was beyond anything she had imagined. There was no camera crew, no script, no lights, just Clint, in that crucial moment, responding with the calm precision of someone who had seen it all before. The flight attendants moved through the cabin, helping the shaken passengers regain their composure. The woman Clint had saved was still, sitting in her seat, her face pale, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Anna couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the woman. After all, it could have been anyone. But then, her thoughts returned to Clint. Why hadn't he made a big deal out of it? Why hadn't he stood up and taken a bow, as most people would in that situation? Instead, Clint sat quietly, lost in thought, as if the dramatic rescue was just another moment in his long, eventful life. Anna had the overwhelming urge to approach him, to thank him, but she hesitated. Clint wasn't the type to seek attention, and Anna knew better than to disturb him. Yet, the encounter was starting to feel surreal. It was one thing to see Clint Eastwood in the movies, but it was another to witness him acting as a true hero. The realization slowly dawned on Anna. This wasn't just about the rescue, it was about Clint's character. He hadn't saved the woman for the recognition or applause. He had done it because that was who he was. And in that moment, Anna learned something powerful. Heroes don't always wear capes. They sometimes wear the quiet strength of humility. As the plane continued its journey through the clouds, the mood inside the cabin had shifted. The earlier tension had dissolved, but the atmosphere still felt heavy with unspoken thoughts. Passengers quietly reflected on what had happened, some still in disbelief over the near tragedy. It was as though the events were too surreal to fully comprehend. Anna, still in awe, couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation from the people around her. Some were commenting on the sheer luck of the situation, while others were speculating on how Clint had acted with such ease. It wasn't just the act of saving a life that stood out, it was the way Clint had done it, calm, collected, and without fanfare. And then slowly, the ripple effect of his actions began to seep into the passengers' conversations. A man a few rows ahead, who had been glued to his phone throughout the flight, put it down and started talking to his seatmate. He was speaking about how we often rush through life, obsessed with achievement and status, only to forget the importance of being present in the moment. Another passenger chimed in, mentioning how Clint's calmness reminded him of his father, who had always known how to handle adversity without losing his cool. The woman Clint had saved had finally stopped shaking. She was no longer in the aisle, but sitting back in her seat, her eyes still wide, her hand gripping the armrest. She hadn't spoken much since the incident, but Anna could see her glancing over at Clint, her expression one of gratitude and disbelief. For Anna, the plane ride had become a journey of its own. She was no longer just a passenger on a plane, she was an observer of something much deeper. What Clint had done, the way he had handled the entire situation, was more than just a rescue. It was a lesson in humility and grace under pressure. The minutes seemed to stretch on forever, the cabin now quieter than before. The flight attendants had finished their rounds, and passengers were left to process what had just transpired. Some were trying to resume their activities, reading, watching movies, or chatting in hushed voices. But for Anna, nothing seemed to be able to distract her from the quiet figure in first class, Clint Eastwood. She found herself glancing over at him frequently, still in awe of the way he had handled the situation. What struck her most wasn't just his heroism in the moment, but the serenity with which he carried himself afterward. It was as though the incident had never happened for him. He didn't seek praise, nor did he look for a reaction. He simply returned to his seat, as if nothing out of the ordinary had taken place. For the first time, Anna began to understand something deeper. It wasn't about the action itself, it was about the mindset behind it. Clint didn't feel the need to prove anything. He wasn't seeking approval, he was simply being himself, and in doing so, he had saved a life. There was a profound silence between the two worlds in that moment. The world of the passengers, full of awe and gratitude, and Clint's world, where he was unaffected by the storm raging around him. His calmness, his refusal to succumb to the chaos of the moment, created an unspoken connection with the others around him. Anna's mind raced. How often did we find ourselves seeking validation from others? How often did we feel the need to prove our worth, just as the woman who had almost fallen from the plane had desperately tried to hold on to her sense of control? But Clint's actions, or rather his lack of need for recognition, spoke louder than any words ever could. As the flight progressed, Anna realized she had witnessed something far greater than a dramatic rescue. It was a glimpse into the true nature of strength, one that didn't need applause or acknowledgement to be powerful. As the hours passed, the plane continued its journey, the hum of the engines now a familiar background noise. Most of the passengers had settled into their own rhythms once again, some snoozing with neck pillows, others lost in their devices. But for Anna, the events from earlier remained etched in her mind, replaying over and over like a film she couldn't stop watching. She sat back in her seat, her eyes closed for a moment as she tried to process everything that had happened. The sight of Clint Eastwood pulling the woman back from the brink of disaster, his calmness in the face of the most terrifying circumstances, it had left her shaken, but it also left her thinking. What was it about Clint that made him different? Why was he so unbothered by the recognition that others would have craved in a similar situation? Anna's thoughts shifted inward, reflecting on her own life. How often had she let fear or anxiety take over? How often had she allowed the chaos of the world around her to disrupt her peace? Clint, on the other hand, had seemed impervious to all of that. He hadn't let the situation overwhelm him. Instead, he had taken action with a quiet authority that spoke volumes. Perhaps, Anna thought, it wasn't just Clint's heroism that made him stand out. It was his ability to stay grounded, to not allow external circumstances to define him. As the plane cruised through the night, Anna realized that she too could embody that same calmness, that same sense of quiet strength. The woman Clint had saved was now sitting up, sipping on water, and slowly starting to regain her composure. She caught Anna's eye and gave her a small, grateful nod. It was clear that, though the shock had passed, the emotional weight of the event still lingered for her, as it did for everyone who had witnessed it. For Anna, the lesson was clear. Strength wasn't about loud declarations or showing off. It was about handling the storm within and finding peace no matter the chaos outside. As the flight continued, the air inside the cabin began to feel different. The earlier tension had eased, replaced by a sense of calm. Anna couldn't help but notice how the passengers now seemed more reflective. Many were lost in thought, perhaps contemplating their own lives, their own actions. The near tragedy had shaken everyone, but it had also revealed something deeper, a truth that was beginning to sink in for all who had witnessed it. Clint Eastwood, the quiet hero, had never once sought attention for his actions. He had done what needed to be done, without hesitation, without a second thought, and in doing so, he had embodied the true meaning of heroism. It wasn't about being in the spotlight or basking in glory. Heroism, as Clint had shown, was about stepping up when needed, with no desire for recognition. It was about doing what was right, even when no one was watching. As Anna reflected on the event, she realized that heroism wasn't always about dramatic life-or-death rescues. It could be found in the smallest acts of kindness, in moments when you choose to help someone without expecting anything in return. Clint had taught her that heroism was quiet, humble, and often unnoticed. It was the strength to act with integrity, to remain calm and grounded no matter what the world threw at you. The woman who had been saved earlier now sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap. She no longer looked as frightened as before, but there was something new in her eyes, something that Anna couldn't quite place. It was as if the woman had gained a new perspective on life, just as Anna had. The flight was no longer just about reaching a destination. It had become a journey of self-discovery for everyone on board, and as the plane continued its course, Anna felt the weight of that discovery settle in her chest. Clint had shown them all that true strength wasn't just physical, it was the strength to be kind, to stay true to yourself, and to act selflessly without expecting anything in return. As the plane began its descent, the lights of the city below began to twinkle like stars, offering a glimpse of the world that awaited them all. The once turbulent flight had settled into a peaceful rhythm, and for the first time since the incident, the cabin was filled with a quiet sense of camaraderie. Passengers exchanged soft words and quiet smiles, as though the events of the past few hours had bonded them in a way they couldn't quite explain. Anna looked out the window, lost in thought. The lessons she had learned from Clint Eastwood's calm and collected actions echoed in her mind. Heroism, she realized, wasn't about making grand gestures or seeking fame. It was about making a difference in the moment when it mattered most, without expecting anything in return. And it was clear to her now that true strength was not defined by power, but by the ability to stay grounded in the midst of chaos. As the plane touched down on the runway, a new sense of clarity washed over Anna. She had been looking for something in her life, something beyond the daily grind, beyond the endless pursuit of status and achievement, and today, in the most unexpected of places, she had found it. True strength, true heroism, and the courage to look inward and find peace in herself. When the plane finally came to a stop, Clint Eastwood stood up, preparing to disembark. He didn't look for applause, nor did he acknowledge the passengers who had been watching him in awe. Instead, he simply gathered his things, nodded to the flight attendants, and walked toward the exit, his every movement exuding calm confidence. As Anna watched him disappear into the crowd, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The day's events had left a lasting impact on her, and she knew that they would stay with her forever. Clint's actions had taught her that heroism wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, humble, and something we could all embody in our own lives. And with that, Anna stepped off the plane, ready to carry the lessons she had learned into the world.